Akansha Arora, thanks so much for speaking to CNN News 18. You've been an audit coordinator at the UN for 4 years. You're now mounting your own independent bid for the post of Secretary General of the UN. This is an unofficial bid. This is a bid that is not being recognized officially as far as the candidature is concerned. So, my first question to you is, what do you make of the process of the elections itself? Some have compared it to a papal conclave, meaning that it is so opaque that nobody really knows exactly how the elections happen. And even though there were some reforms brought in the last election, it seems like the body has gone back on those promises of a more free and fair and transparent election. So, my first question is, what do you make of the process itself?
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I want to start by agreeing with you that you're right, that the selection process for the most important job in the world, Secretary General, is not transparent, is not open. For the first 70 years of the organization, it was literally a papal conclave where decisions were made by a small group of men, mostly, and for men, and we wouldn't even know who the candidates were in most cases. In 2015 fall, they passed a resolution 69-321 that made the process open, transparent, or more open and more transparent. That guided the 2016 election. So in 2016 election, we had 13 candidates, 7 of them were women, and it was a fairly open process. And that was my objective when I was running when I was deciding to run for this position of Secretary General. I was guided by that resolution 69-321 that allows self-nominated candidates to run for the position of Secretary General. So I submitted my candidacy, and now what we are seeing is behavior by member states, which is, oh, self-nomination is not allowed. How could you change the rules of an election in the middle of an election? Mm-hmm. And on top of that, they're now making it mandatory to get country nomination. And of course, countries are biased. They will not allow self-nominated candidates to go through unless they have their own vested interest. So I think you can say this is a reflection of UN's failure at its highest. This is where they think they can get away by just changing the rules of the game and making it so much tribal. If you're from our tribe, you'll get the job. If not, you won't. So very unfortunate. With that being said, I really am hoping countries like India, which is the largest democracy, and countries like United States, which is the oldest democracy, in Security Council will stand up and demonstrate their leadership, that these are not countries that would abide by democracy just being bypassed in a Secretary General election. But so far, I have to say, India hasn't said anything, neither has United States. So I think it's on Prime Minister Modi and President Biden to uphold the values that they promote domestically. Domestically, they're all about democracy and free and fair elections. I think to take that leadership mantle at an international stage.
So naturally, my second question to you is, what do you make of your bid? As I said, it's not being recognized officially. What do you make of your chances? And what is the central idea behind mounting this independent bid?
I think the fact that, I think you just said it yourself, what does this speak of Antonio Guterres himself as a leader, that you are so not confident in your own leadership abilities and in your own accomplishment over 5 years that you can even consider winning a second term on your, just on having a fair election. I think the fact that he is silent on it speaks to his leadership and his lack of ensuring a free and fair process and to duly get a position second term. What do I make of my candidacy? I think, like I said, the world is watching UN for bypassing their own rules and regulations in this. I have submitted my candidacy and all my documents. I'm continuing to meet member states, and I do meet member states where I hear that they're sympathetic and they are considering raising this question in the General Assembly, that why are we changing rules in the middle of an election? With that being said, as a normal person, I think this is where I have to appeal to the public. I'm a normal person. I don't come from power and influence. This discrimination is not just against me. This discrimination is against a gender that has never been represented. This discrimination is against a generation that the old guard will never consider us equal. This discrimination is against professionals, basically. Politicians are saying, if you are professionals, you don't belong in the position of Secretary General. The relevance of our experience is being diminished. So I think people of the world have to do their part. I'm doing their part. This is a collective effort. We still have time to influence, to inform members of the media like yourself, your audience, on what the UN is doing. And I'm hopeful that people would speak up and not allow this to go through.
What is also very interesting is that as someone who has worked with the UN for the last 4 years, your campaign also mentions how only about 29 cents to a dollar actually goes in real relief or aid from the UN. In other words, the body is not really functioning very efficiently. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, so it's 29 cents to a dollar. So UN, I think not just the Secretary General selection process is opaque, UN in general is opaque. There are a lot of things people don't know about the UN. So when I say UN, first of all, there are two UNs. There's a UN that makes decisions, Security Council, General Assembly, Economic and Social Commission. There's a UN that implements decision. Now, this UN that implements decisions has close to 100 entities, 100 entities. This has a budget of more than $50 billion, and they spend 29 cents of every dollar for the actual cost. Rest of the money goes into bureaucracy of overhead salaries and the business model of the UN is transitioned from actually serving people to holding conferences, writing reports, and showing that they do something versus doing something. When it comes to climate, that number for every dollar is 15 cents, 1.5 to the dollar that goes into nature-based solutions. Rest goes into talking about climate and climate solutions in the world. So I think what the consequence of this is that the world today is not seeing any of the results of the UN. Like the UN today has become irrelevant to the people. UN today has become almost an elite entity that doesn't even cater to the needs of people. And I think just the Israel-Palestine conflict and all the conflicts in the world, Myanmar, Tigray conflict, I think just the way UN has handled it is almost like this is an organization that's just rubber stamping the decisions of UN, not really taking its own positions in meeting the needs of the people.
The one question that the world is asking is, what is it bodies like the UN, the WHO, and others are being able to achieve in today's world in 21st century challenges, different from the times when they were first started. In fact, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also mentioned that bodies like the UN have to pivot themselves. They have to be able to do more, which is in context of what the world needs today. They have to speed up the process. They have to be able to do the reforms and the procedures that have been pending for very long. Your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with the statement that you just quoted from PM Modi, that the organizations were created in 1945 or around that time mostly and are not relevant today. And I'll give you a simple example. A lot of UN agencies spend money on development. And what does that look like? That looks like promoting SDGs. That looks like writing reports about SDGs. That looks like holding conferences and summits around SDGs, but not really implementing those SDGs. So the job in development has to become about talking and not really implementing at the ground level. Like we're far off from the ground. So we first need to stop the business model of talking, because the world is on the same page when it comes to SDGs. There's no one who denies that these are not good goals. They are not supposed to be achieved. Let's pivot into actioning. And even when it comes to actioning, let's just pivot into providing universal internet, universal education, the foundation of SDGs. Once you provide the tools for 21st century to the people, the world would develop automatically. The other thing is humanitarian. This is where UN is the only entity that can do anything when it comes to humanitarian work, that in crisis, conflict, and refugee crisis, or in a natural disaster situation. We don't spend enough money there. We actually don't invest as much as we should. I'll give you a simple example. Refugee is a huge crisis that impacts all over the world. Today, UNHCR says they cannot meet the needs of all the refugees because of a funding shortfall of more than $4 billion. Yet their annual travel budget, which includes business and first class, is $2.3 billion. Like, who told them to spend money on travel and not feed the hungry, not provide basic necessities for the hungry? In 2010, they got cholera to Haiti. Haiti had an earthquake. UN peacekeepers brought cholera. They killed 10,000 Haitians, affected close to 1 million because it's in their water system. They were told to compensate $400 million in 2016, just $400 million. They haven't compensated at all. And this is an entity in that same time frame has spent $10 billion on travel, business, including business and first class. So I think the organizations have to pivot, which requires doing that soul searching that we don't need that many organizations. Why do you have 6 organizations on climate? Why do you have 3 on food? Like, we need to consolidate. We need to retire organizations and pivot into humanitarian needs, because development can easily be shifted to the private sector, NGOs, and allow them to directly partner with governments. We don't need to play that role of like taking a middleman cut all the time. So you're right, there is a lot of work to be done. And I think that's where reforms are needed. And I think I go back to, again, it's important that Prime Minister Modi has identified the problem. I think it's even more important that he then does something about it to demonstrate his leadership at a world stage, which is to allow a candidate that is a reforms candidate to be part of the solution, because discussions will only make UN better. So I think I would just push it back to PM Modi to say, great idea, let's take it forward.
And finally, tell us a little bit about yourself as well. It's good to see an Indian mounting a bid like this for one of the most recognized positions in the world. You come from an Indian refugee family. Share with us a little bit about your history.
Yeah, so all four of my grandparents left Pakistan to India after the partition. On my dad's side, they settled in Moga. My grandparents were street vendors. Of course, back then you didn't have like any job programs. You had to do what you could to support your family. So they sold teas and samosas. They couldn't complete their education. Their goal was to make sure their children are educated, and they were successfully able to do that. On my mom's side, my grandfather was the only working member supporting a family of 7. And he was a mailman with the government. He would deliver mail on his bicycle. Again, just wanted to educate his children so they had a better and brighter future. And he was able to. So my parents are physicians. I was born in Rohtak, and my parents were finishing their med school when I was there. So my first year, I was raised by my nanny. And my parents would visit me a lot. And then I moved in with my parents when they finished their med school. We moved to Delhi later. And at 6, we moved to Saudi Arabia. Saudi was a really good childhood as well for me, because it was a different place. And I think that was where I had my first exposure to being a human and not really belonging to one gender or nationality, because you see people in different language, but you realize, you know what, we're all the same. Like, you might speak differently, you might eat different than I do, but we're all the same. Saudi did have schools for girls, but in Arabic. I couldn't pick up math and stuff in Arabic. So I was homeschooled until 9, moved back to India for boarding school. Again, so supported by my extended family, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, my grandparents. I mean, just like any Indian, like, you know, it takes a village to raise a community, and we're such a communal family. So 18, moved to Canada for college. And but I think just in terms of my experiences in India, once you're Indian, you're always Indian. My parents are Indians, my whole family is Indian. So I am truly a person of our country. And I think people ask me, where do you get the courage to do this, to mount a campaign? And I think it comes from being an Indian. Because, you know, in India, if someone falls on the street, 10 people come and say, oh my God, are you okay? In New York, one person falls, no one comes. They're like, okay, they just walk past you. And I think that's what makes us so special, is we are not a community that is so self-interested. We always care about others. And I think that's why I'm running for this candidacy, is because I will be fine. Will the world be fine? Like, you know, we're all fine in our own little worlds, but what about others? And I think there's no one speaking out for those who have no voice. And I think for me, that was important to bring to the stage.
Thanks a lot for speaking to us. We wish you all the best. And we certainly hope that bodies like the UN can actually demonstrate that as they profess democracy to the world, they do have true internal democracy as well. And they bring in more internal reforms as they are asking for. Thanks a lot for speaking to us.
Thank you so much for having me. Namaste.